Welcome to Born into Light. Something in your life has been too quiet for too long. Not empty, quiet in that strange way that makes you feel like you missed a message you were supposed to hear. And the reason it keeps circling back now is because it was never random. No, stay with this for a moment. You have felt it before. That strange pressure in your chest when everything around you looks normal, but something inside you knows it is not. You have tried to name it. You have tried to explain it. And maybe every time you did, people made you feel like you were reading too much into nothing. But nothing about you has been nothing. There was a reason your mind kept returning to the same questions. There was a reason certain doors closed right when you thought they would open. There was a reason you kept feeling delayed, blocked, interrupted. That part matters more than you think. Because when God wants to reach someone who has been ignored, misunderstood, or buried under too much silence, he does not always shout. Sometimes he keeps pressing the same message into your life until you finally turn and face it. And for you, that message has been coming through in ways you almost missed. You called it bad luck. You called it stress. You called it timing. But what if the thing that kept slowing you down was never punishment? What if it was protection? What if the delay that frustrated you so deeply was the only reason you are still standing here now? You were not rejected the way you thought you were. You were being redirected. That job that slipped away, that person who pulled back, that plan that collapsed right before it happened, that door that seemed so certain and then shut in your face, it all hit you like loss, but something bigger was happening under the surface. You were being moved before you could be trapped in the wrong place. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because your life has not been following the same script as everyone else's. You noticed that early. You just did not know what it meant yet. You've always been a little out of sync with the crowd, not because you are broken, because you are wired differently. You saw what other people ignored. You felt what other people dismissed. You carried weight in silence while everybody else was busy performing fine. And because of that, you started to think maybe something was wrong with you. It was never that something was wrong, it was that you were being prepared. There is a kind of pressure that only forms on people who are being shaped for something specific. It does not feel holy while you are inside it. It feels lonely. It feels like too much waiting, too much testing, too much being overlooked. It feels like being in a room full of voices and still feeling unseen. But that unseen place was not a mistake, it was the furnace. And you know what is strange? The more unseen you felt, the more something in you refused to die. That spark would not go away, even when you were tired, even when you wanted to quit, even when you thought maybe your life would never become what you hoped. There was still a part of you that kept listening, kept sensing, kept waiting for the moment when all of it would make sense. That is because it was meant to. You felt it before anyone ever said it out loud, like something higher was trying to reach you. Type in the comments, "cold," subscribe to Born into Light. There are moments when heaven reaches a person through interruption, not always through comfort, sometimes through disruption, sometimes through the exact thing that makes you pause and ask, why did that happen to me? Why now? Why again? And if you are honest, you have been asking that question more than once. But there was something hidden inside the pattern. You did not lose what left. You were spared from what would have drained you. You did not fail where you thought you failed. You were denied access to something that was never aligned with your path. You did not miss your chance. You were being kept for the right one. And yes, that changes everything. Because the pain of being delayed is real. It can make you doubt yourself. It can make you feel forgotten. It can make you think God is silent. But silence is not absence. Sometimes silence is instruction. Sometimes silence is the space where a deeper call is being formed in you before it is finally heard clearly. And that call has been there all along. You may have sensed it in the middle of ordinary moments. When you were alone and no one could explain why you suddenly felt watched over. When you were about to make the wrong choice and something in you stopped. When you escaped something that should have broken you. When you almost stepped into a situation that looked harmless on the outside but carried weight you could not yet see. That was not coincidence. There are people who keep forcing life. You are not one of them. You have been guided more than you realized. Even in the moments that felt like chaos, there was a line you could not cross, not because you were weak, but because you were being held. That is why certain losses never fully destroyed you. They should have by all logic, but they did not. You bent, you hurt, you questioned everything, but you did not disappear. And that is important, because what survives that kind of pressure is usually being preserved for a reason. You may have thought the isolation was a punishment. It was not. Your isolation had a purpose. You needed to hear yourself without all the noise. You needed to separate the voice of fear from the voice of truth. You needed distance from what was loud enough to distract you, but not deep enough to sustain you. Being apart from people who could not understand you was painful, yes, but it also protected your assignment. That is why you were never able to fully fit where you tried to fit. They could not see you, and that was the point. If they had seen you too clearly too soon, they would have mislabeled you. They would have reduced you. They would have pulled you into roles that were too small for what was growing in you. And you know this already, even if you have never said it out loud. You have often felt too deep for shallow spaces, too honest for performative connections, too sensitive for cold environments, too aware for conversations that pretend nothing is happening. That has made you feel like an outsider, but it is actually one of the signs that you are being called to something higher. Stay with this, because this part matters. There is a difference between being alone and being set apart. You have been both, and the set-apart season can feel brutal because it strips away the distractions that used to comfort you. It leaves you with your thoughts, your memories, your unanswered questions, your almosts, your why-nots. That is where the real work happens. That is where the false identity starts falling apart. Because some of what you believed about yourself was planted by disappointment. Some of what you thought was your weakness was actually exhaustion from carrying things you were never meant to carry forever. Some of the shame you felt did not even belong to you. You absorbed it from the people around you who never understood the depth of your spirit. And here is something you need to hear clearly. You were not created to live small just because others felt uncomfortable around your light. That is why there has been resistance. You might have noticed that every time you began to rise, something seemed to push back. Every time you started trusting yourself, something came to shake that trust. Every time you started believing that your life would finally open, another delay appeared. It almost felt personal. And maybe that is because it was not just random life trouble. Some things are resisted precisely because they matter. Not everything that blocks you is evil. Some of it is timing, some of it is refinement, some of it is God refusing to let you walk into what would have weakened you before you were ready. That is what protection looks like when you are inside it. You almost walked away from your path more than once, and that matters. It matters because the fact that you did not walk away says something about the way you are being held. You were tired enough to quit. You were disappointed enough to give up. You were close enough to leaving the whole thing behind, but something in you would not let the door close fully. Even when you were angry, even when you were confused, even when you thought there was no point in hoping anymore, the call remained. That call is not loud. It is steady. It comes back when you are quiet. It returns when the world gets too fake. It rises when you are drained and can no longer pretend. It is the part of you that keeps saying, there must be more than this. There must be a reason I went through all of that. There must be a meaning behind the parts of my life that do not make sense yet. And yes, there is. But here is what you did not see. The message was never only about what you lost. It was about who you became while you were losing it. You became more aware, more patient, more discerning, more honest, more able to tell the difference between a distraction and a direction. That did not happen by accident. That was part of the shaping. Because there is a version of you that could not have handled what is coming now, and God knew that. So He let certain things fall away. He let the fake friendships reveal themselves. He let the wrong opportunities expose their emptiness. He let the emotional dead ends show you exactly what they were. He let your confidence be stripped down to nothing, so you would stop depending on appearances and start depending on truth. You thought those losses were proving you wrong. They were actually exposing what was not for you, and that is why the pain was so specific. It was not random pain, it was directional pain. It pointed away from one life and toward another. You may have felt buried, but burial is not always the end. Sometimes it is where the seed is placed before growth. The part that is under pressure is often the part that is closest to breakthrough, even though it feels like the opposite. That is why this season has been so confusing. You kept looking for proof in the wrong place. You were searching for progress in the visible, while the real progress was happening where nobody could track it, inside you, quietly, slowly. And that quiet work has been more powerful than you know. There were moments when you thought God forgot you. You did not say it exactly like that, maybe, but your heart asked it. You looked at the timing of your life and wondered why it took so long for anything to shift. You watched other people move ahead while you felt stuck in the same emotional weather. You saw less effort from them and more results, and it made no sense. But the truth is, your path was never meant to look easy from the outside. Some paths are simple. Yours is not simple. Yours is sacred. That does not mean it has been fair. It does not mean it has been comfortable. It does mean the weight you have carried is not wasted. The tears were not wasted. The waiting was not wasted. The nights you stayed awake replaying everything were not wasted. Even the confusion had a purpose, because confusion can break the illusion that you are in control and finally make you listen. And listening is exactly what this is about. There is a kind of call that reaches a person long before they are ready to understand it. It follows them through setbacks. It waits through silence. It stays alive under distraction. It stays alive under distraction. It survives heartbreak. It survives delay. And then one day, usually when you are least expecting it, the pattern starts to reveal itself. That missed moment, it was intentional. That closed door, it was intentional. That strange interruption that changed the whole direction of your life, intentional. You were not being abandoned. You were being aligned. And that is why this message keeps hitting so deep, because some part of you already knew there had to be a greater hand in it. You may not have had the language for it, but you felt it. You felt like your life was being steered around dangers you could not see. You felt like the universe or life or God or something far beyond your own understanding was refusing to let certain things land. You were right to feel that. There has been guidance in what looked like detours. There has been mercy in what looked like denial. There has been structure in what looked like chaos. And yes, I know how hard that is to accept when you are standing in the middle of it. It is much easier to call everything meaningless than to admit your life might be more watched over than you thought. But your spirit has never been content with shallow explanations. That is why this message found you. You are not the kind of person who can live forever pretending everything is normal when it is not. You notice, you feel the pressure in the room. You sense when something is unfinished. You know when a life is speaking underneath the surface. That is part of your gift. And it is also why the wrong spaces exhaust you so quickly. You were never meant to be molded by noise. You were meant to be led by truth. And truth does not always come gently. Sometimes it shows up as disruption. Sometimes it comes as the exact thing that forces you to stop and reassess your whole path. Sometimes it shows up as a moment of deep discomfort that cracks the old story open. That is what has been happening to you. Your old story has been cracking. The one where you were invisible, the one where you were always behind, the one where you kept interpreting your life as a chain of failures. That story is losing its grip. Because a different truth is emerging now. A stronger one, a quieter one, but deeper. The truth that you have been covered more than you realized. The truth that what was meant to break you did not finish the job. The truth that your sensitivity was not weakness. The truth that your delay was not denial. The truth that you were being prepared to recognize the call when it finally became impossible to ignore. And now it is impossible to ignore. That is why you keep seeing the same signs, the same messages, the same internal pull, the same feeling that something is about to shift, not maybe, not Sunday, soon, because the pressure has reached the point where it can no longer stay hidden. The old pattern is thinning out. The old confusion is losing power. The thing you could not name before is becoming clearer by the day. You were always moving toward this. Even when it looked like you were losing time, you were gathering wisdom. Even when it looked like you were stuck, you were being anchored. Even when it looked like nothing was happening, something essential was being built in you. Not in front of people, not for a pause. In secret, where only God could shape it. That is why so much of your life has felt like hidden preparation. A lot of what hurt you was not meant to define you. It was meant to refine you, to strip away the parts of you that depended on approval, to weaken the need to be understood by everyone, to make you strong enough to stand in a truth that does not require permission. And once you see that, your whole past starts changing shape. The rejection was never the final word. The loneliness was never the final word. The delay was never the final word. The confusion was never the final word. What was really happening is that you were being moved into position long before you knew the destination. You were being trained to hear what others miss, to trust what others dismiss, to follow what others would call strange. And now that call is not vague anymore. It is direct, it is personal, it is coming right at you. You are being summoned into awareness. That is why this feels so familiar. Not because you heard it before with your ears, but because your spirit has been carrying it for longer than your mind can remember. There is a part of you that has always known you were not here by accident, a part of you that never fully settled for the smaller explanations, a part of you that kept asking whether your pain had a larger meaning. It did, and it does. You were being taught how to survive what would have crushed a lesser version of you. You were being taught how to discern what looked good but was not good for you. You were being taught how to endure silence without losing faith. You were being taught how to stay soft without becoming weak. You were being taught how to keep going when the result was invisible. That is not failure, that is formation. And now the formation is turning into clarity. This is why the old ache in you has changed. It is no longer just pain, it is recognition that the life you thought you were delayed from may have been a life you were never meant to enter. Recognition that the people who could not understand you were never supposed to validate you. Recognition that the moments you thought were dead ends were actually pivots. You were being guided around what could have stolen your peace. And maybe that is the deepest truth of all. Not that you were alone, but that you were being watched over through the loneliness. Not that you were lost, but that you were being rerouted. Not that you missed your life, but that your life was being preserved until you could meet it with stronger eyes. That is why the call has been getting louder. Not louder in sound, louder in sound, louder in presence, louder in your awareness, louder in the way certain things now feel impossible to ignore. You're noticing the pattern now because the season has changed. The hidden work is surfacing. The meaning is rising. The thing that felt blocked is beginning to open. And when it does, you will understand why it had to happen this way. You were never off track. You were being aligned. You were never forgotten. You were being prepared. You were being prepared. You were never too late. You were being protected. And the strange, heavy, almost unbearable feeling you carried for so long was not proof that you were abandoned. It was proof that you were in the middle of something deeper than you knew. Something exact. Something timed. Something that had your name on it long before you understood what you were being called toward. That is why your life could not stay ordinary. That is why the pressure never fully left. That is why the losses kept pointing somewhere. That is why the silence kept speaking. God has been calling you all along, not once, not vaguely, all along. And now the call is no longer hiding under your pain. It is rising above it, clearer, sharper, undeniable. The things you endured are not just past events anymore. They are becoming evidence. evidence that you were led, evidence that you were guarded, evidence that the path was working even when it looked like it was failing. This explains so much, does it not? Why you could not stay where others stayed, why you kept sensing something before it happened, why the wrong thing always felt almost right until it suddenly did not, why certain endings hurt so badly yet somehow saved you, why being unseen was not the same as being unseen by heaven. You were being called from the beginning, and what you are feeling now is not the start of the message. It is the moment the message finally becomes impossible to deny, because something has shifted in you recently, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that you can't go back to how you were seeing things before. You're noticing patterns you once ignored. You're questioning things you used to accept. You're feeling a pull that doesn't let you settle the way you used to. And that pull, it's not random, it's precise. It's been building quietly under everything. Think about this carefully. Why now? Why, after everything you've already been through, does this awareness begin to sharpen? Why didn't it come earlier, when you were asking for answers? Why didn't clarity arrive when you were at your lowest? Because you weren't ready to see it yet. Not because you were incapable, but because seeing it too early would have changed your decisions in ways that would have led you somewhere you were never meant to go. You had to walk through certain illusions fully, not halfway, not with doubt, fully. You had to believe in things that would later break. You had to trust people who would later reveal themselves. You had to step toward doors that would later close in your face. And yes, that part hurt more than anything, because it made you feel foolish. It made you question your judgment. It made you wonder how you could have been so sure and still been wrong. But you weren't wrong. You were allowed to experience what was never meant to stay. There's a difference, and this is the part most people never understand. You don't learn discernment by avoiding everything. You learn it by encountering what looks right, feels right, almost fits, but carries something slightly off beneath the surface. That's slightly off feeling you used to ignore. You don't ignore it anymore. That hesitation you once pushed aside, now it stops you. That inner voice you doubted, now it's getting harder to silence. This is where it shifts. Because the same life that once confused you is now starting to reveal its structure. Not all at once, but piece by piece, moment by moment, connection by connection. You're starting to see that nothing entered your life without leaving something behind. Even the people who hurt you left awareness. Even the delays that frustrated you built patience. Even the silence that drained you sharpened your hearing. And now you're different, not on the surface, but underneath, in the way you process, in the way you sense, in the way you sense, in the way you pause before stepping forward. And here's what you didn't see before. This new awareness is not just for understanding your past, it's for protecting your future. Because what's coming next requires a version of you that cannot be easily misled, cannot be easily distracted, cannot be easily pulled into what only looks right. And that version of you is forming now, slowly, intentionally. But there's something deeper here, something you're just beginning to notice. You're not only becoming more aware of what's wrong, you're becoming more sensitive to what's right, and that feels unfamiliar, because for so long your focus was survival, avoiding pain, getting through the day, trying to make sense of what kept falling apart. But now, there's a different kind of feeling showing up, subtle but steady, a sense that something is aligning, not perfectly, not completely, but enough that you can feel a shift in direction, and it's quiet. So quiet you almost dismiss it, but don't, because this is how alignment begins, not with noise, not with sudden breakthroughs, but with small internal confirmations that start to repeat. You feel it in moments where nothing is happening, yet something feels right. You notice it when certain things no longer attract you the way they used to. You recognize it when you walk away from what once would have pulled you in. That's not loss. That's refinement. You are no longer available for what cannot hold your future. And that changes everything, even if it doesn't look like it yet. But here's the part that matters more than you realize. The closer you move toward alignment, the more resistance may appear. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're no longer easy to misdirect. And anything that once had access to your attention, your energy, your time, will begin to lose its grip. That can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like confusion again, like things are shaking just when they were starting to make sense. But this time it's different. This time the confusion doesn't pull you back, it pushes you forward. You start asking different questions. You start seeing through things faster. You start feeling less attached to outcomes that once controlled you. And that's not detachment in a cold way, it's clarity. You're no longer chasing what was never meant to stay. You're no longer forcing what doesn't flow. You're no longer interpreting every delay as rejection. Because something in you now understands, if it doesn't align, it won't remain. And if it doesn't remain, it was never yours to carry forward. That realization alone, it shifts your entire relationship with your past. Because suddenly, you're not looking back with regret, you're looking back with recognition. Recognition that you were being guided out of things you thought you needed, guided away from paths you thought were yours, guided through experiences that felt unnecessary but were actually essential. And the more you see that, the less power your past has over you. Not because it didn't matter, but because it finally makes sense. And when something makes sense, it stops haunting you the same way. It stops confusing you. It stops holding you in place. But there's still something you haven't fully seen yet, something just beneath all of this. Because this wasn't only about protecting you from the wrong things, it was also about preparing you for the right ones. And the right ones, they don't enter the same version of you that accepted less. They don't meet you where you were confused. They don't align with who you were when you were still doubting your own instincts. They meet you here, in this version, the one who sees more, the one who feels deeper but clearer, the one who no longer ignores what doesn't sit right. And that's why timing had to be exact. Because if certain things had come earlier, you might have accepted them in the wrong way. You might have held on to them too tightly. You might have built your identity around them, instead of recognizing them as part of a bigger path. But now you're starting to see without clinging, feel without losing yourself, move without forcing. And that changes how everything will enter your life from this point forward. Nothing random will last. Nothing misaligned will hold. Nothing forced will stay stable, because you're no longer the same person who could sustain those things. And here's where it gets even more real. You're not just being guided anymore. You're becoming aware that you are being guided. There's a difference. Before, it was happening behind the scenes. Now, you can feel it happening. You can sense when something is right before it fully reveals itself. You can feel when something is wrong before it fully unfolds. That awareness, it's not imagination, it's not overthinking, it's connection. And once that connection becomes clear, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to moving blindly. You can't return to ignoring what your spirit is picking up. And that's exactly why this moment matters so much. Because you're standing at a point where the message is no longer hidden in your life. It's becoming visible through you, in your choices, in your reactions, in your silence, in what you allow and what you no longer tolerate. And this is where most people hesitate. Because clarity brings responsibility. Once you see, you have to decide. Once you feel, you have to respond. Once you recognize the pattern, you can't pretend it's not there anymore. And that can feel heavy, because it means stepping fully into what you've been sensing all along. Not halfway, not with doubt, fully. And you're close to that point, closer than you think. You've already outgrown too much to go back. You've already seen too much to ignore. You've already felt too much to dismiss. So the only direction left is forward. But forward doesn't mean rushing. Forward means trusting what you now understand. Even when it's quiet, even when it's slow, even when it doesn't look like progress from the outside. Because what's happening now, it's not about speed, it's about precision. Every step matters. Every choice carries weight. Every moment of awareness builds something stronger. And you're stepping into a space where things will begin to respond to that awareness, where what aligns will start to recognize you, where what doesn't will fall away faster than before. And when that starts happening, you'll realize something that changes everything again, that the call you thought you were trying to understand has already been shaping how you move, how you choose, how you see. It's already active, already present, already working through you, and the more you lean into it, the clearer it becomes. But there's still one layer left, one piece you haven't fully faced yet, and when that part reveals itself, you won't just understand your path, you'll understand why it could never have been any other way. And once that lands in you, everything starts to feel different. Not easier, just clearer. You stop fighting the shape of your own life. You stop demanding answers before their time. You stop calling every delay a loss, because now you can feel it. There has been something moving beside your story the whole time. Not loudly, not in a way you could control, but steadily, carefully. And it was never leading you into emptiness. It was leading you toward the place where your life would finally make sense. That is why this feeling will not leave you now. That is why the message keeps returning. That is why even this moment feels heavier than it should. Something in you is recognizing what your mind is only beginning to catch up with. And that recognition changes you. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you trust. It changes what you walk away from. It changes what you can no longer ignore. Because once you know you have been guided, you stop moving like someone abandoned. You start moving like someone protected. And there is still more ahead, more to see, more to understand, more pieces that will fit in a way they never could before. You do not need all of it right now. You only need to stay open long enough to feel what is already approaching, because this is not the end of the message. It is the moment it begins to unfold for real. It was never silence, it was a voice you're only now beginning to hear. Subscribe to Born into Light.